All right, we're back again. Shez, how are you doing?
Really good. We're recording this just after FP2. We've seen some real cars on track doing representative times.
That's right.
Whew.
That's right. Real cars, and this has been a heck of a week for us. We have managed to anger both Mercedes fans and Red Bull fans. So we've created in this time of no kind of unity. We have united two fan bases that would otherwise not like each other. We've united Red Bull fans with Mercedes fans, and they both want us gone away. They have described us as idiots, as novices, as people who are dreaming big things. Shez, you and I have doctorate degrees, but no one would know that considering the comments. How do you feel about how the response has gone? The praise has been pouring in, man.
I love it. Keep all the comments coming in. We read all of them, respond to all of them as much as we can. And it's great to see that everyone's engaged. Thank you.
Yeah, we love it too. We love you guys interacting. Keep it coming and keep making us better. We really appreciate everyone that's taken the time to comment, like, subscribe, so on and so forth.
As our first look into 2024, uh, with some FP2 knowledge behind us, we are going to do Teammate Wars, the first running of the Tired F1 pod, Teammate Wars. We're going to look at every team on the grid and we're going to decide which driver is going to win and what the other drivers need to do to get on top of their teammate. Here
Yeah,
we go.
let's get it on.
Okay, team number one, Ammar, Red Bull, Max Verstappen, champion of 2023, 2022, and asterisk 2021.
Oh, oh, wow. Oh my God. That's gonna get our people mad.
I'm just kidding. Versus Sergio Perez. So just some objective data. Last year, Max finished in the championship first. Perez finished second, and their qualifying head to head was a fairly crushing Verstappen 20, Perez 2. Who's going to win this one, Amar?
Wow. I mean, I feel like if I were a gambling man, I would want to put all my money on Checo, right? No, I'm kidding. Of course, I mean, I don't why are we spending time on this, man? Like this is a given. Like if there's one thing we can predict for this season, it is this, which is there's no way that Checo's beating Max. Like unless something unforeseen happens, it's not gonna happen. So it's gonna be Max hands down. Why would I think otherwise? It makes no sense.
But Perez has come out this season and said, I had lots of trouble with the 2023 car, but this one seems much more comfortable. I mean, he didn't seem to show it that much in testing, and he doesn't seem to have shown that turn of pace, particularly in FP2, where Verstappen had the legs on one lap pace, certainly. Um, what does Perez need to do to turn that around?
So I think what he needs to do, and this is going to be a tough year, right? I mean, we'll talk about what he needs to do, but the reality is that this is probably his last year there, right? Like, I mean, it is difficult to see him go past because there have been clear signs of frustration with Checo. I'm not suggesting for a second that they're all valid in any which way. There's been a lot said about him that frankly is borderline unacceptable, right? And we've gone through those iterations, but the reality is that ultimately it doesn't seem like Checo is the driver who fits the Red Bull model in this iteration of what Red Bull is trying to do, which is to really get a solid second guy to Max, right? And that's what they're trying to do. Oh, by the way, you also have Daniel Ricciardo waiting in the backgrounds, just ready to pounce on that seat, so to speak. And then who knows what happens with the whole silly season there. So with that as context, I think what Checo can do is sort of model his performance for his whoever his next team is going to be, which is to try to be right up there with Max as many times as I can, as often as he can. He's really struggled in qualifying, right? And in some ways, we're talking about Max versus Checo, but he struggled against Charles. He's struggled against Carlos in many different races last year. And I think he really needs to work on that. His sort of ceiling here is being that second guy to Max and just sort of being there and seeing what happens. Let's say something goes wrong with Max's car or there's an off day by any chance, which is hard to imagine, then he's right there for the win. That's the best he can do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Perez is in that Red Bull Max's number two spiral of despair that Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon found themselves in as well. That you find that you're not as fast as Max, because you can't deal with the car characteristics as well. So you keep trying to chase a setup that will get you back to that level, and you try and change your driving style to try and match what Max does. And the more you do that, the slower you get,
So you
and the
get.
worse your results get. And
Mhm.
it just carries on and on and on. But I think that's based on a mentality that you're coming into the season hoping to beat Max
Max.
Verstappen. And I wonder if actually Perez's mentality on that, maybe it's a bit defeatist, just needs to change. That actually it's not about beating Max, it's just about uh, maximizing his own performance. And maybe that's not enough to beat Max, but it'll be enough to give him consistent good performance week on week. And as you say, it will just mean that when Max has an off day, which or let's be real, if
It's
Max's
not going to
car
happen.
breaks, if Max's car breaks, then Perez is there solidly to pick up the pieces, not performing another miraculous recovery drive. And I think it is important um, that he does that on two fronts. Like you said, this is most likely going to be his last season at Red Bull, and he has to make sure that he sees out the entire season. Red Bull are very
Mhm.
notorious for just replacing their drivers mid-season with no regard. Um, but he needs to see out the season and make himself appear attractive to other teams. Now he's in a strong position because if he does get dropped by Red Bull, other teams are going to want to know some of the stuff that he has learned from Red Bull as an organization, as a technical exercise. Um, but he has to show that he has some performance. Um, and even if he doesn't beat Max this season, he has to show that to make his career
Mhm.
um, attractive to other teams. That's what I think he needs to do.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing, which is it is perhaps a foregone conclusion that Max will win the drivers' championship, but I think we can comfortably surmise that the constructors' championship is up for grabs, right? If Ferrari have managed to make that positive step forward, if McLaren have made that positive step forward, if I mean, we're going off of FP2 practice results here, but if Mercedes have made a jump, the constructors title is in play. That is very much at play. So Max, in other words, could win all the races that are out there, all 24, and yet there's a formula for for a Ferrari to be a constructors champion this year. So I think from that perspective, I think Checo needs to be very focused on making sure that he can get the best out of his car to put the team as far ahead as he possibly can.
Yep. Um, we probably should ask the question: is there anything that Max needs to do?
Not get sick. I don't know. Not miss a flight. It's really hard. I mean, look, I still have this little bit of hope that if Ferrari, if McLaren can be at right next to him, neck and neck, right? If Leclerc can be there, I think there's an element of pressure that we have not seen be put on Max since the 21 season. And granted, that was the first year he won a championship. He's won two more since then. So it does change the psychology of the driver to a great extent. But he
Yeah.
hasn't really been pushed for a better part of the last two seasons. So who knows what that looks like, right? I kind of leave the door open ever so slightly for something like that happening, but it's still a big leap of faith.
Yeah, I agree. I think Max's thing is to keep doing what he's doing and continue to exert the influence that he has on the team in the direction of development. Um, because they will keep developing their car to be as fast as it possibly can. And as long as he's the driver that can exploit that and drive development forwards, then it's going to be all him. So there you go. Max Verstappen will win the teammate war and it at Red Bull. And Perez just needs to focus on his own performance and do the best he can.
There you go.
That sounds like your parent-teacher meeting done. Okay, team number two, Mercedes-Benz AMG F1 Performance, I think. Is that what they're called?
I mean, we haven't seen another sponsor come in just yet, so
I don't know. I mean, if Lewis can't even remember what the name of his team is, then what chance do we have?
Cheeky
Anyway,
that you got that.
anyway, so teammate wars at Mercedes: Lewis Hamilton versus George Russell. Last year's championship standings: Lewis Hamilton finished third, George finished eighth, but in the qualifying, head to head, 11 all. Who comes out on top, Ammar?
Oh goodness, I am very conflicted about this, if I'm being honest, right? I mean, I think there's the sentimentality, the romance of Lewis having been with Mercedes for a decade now, right? And everything that he has meant to that team and what they have meant to him. And I think everyone's saying the right things coming out in and into the start of this season, which is that we're fully behind, making sure that we're at the front, aka we'll do everything to support you, Lewis. But I cannot imagine that sentiment would hold on as the season moves forward, right? I would suspect that starts to wane away as we start thinking about what 25 looks like. And so my guess is that the car is going to go. I don't know if it goes away from him, but I think it will go more towards George as the season passes. And I could see George coming out on top. If I'm George, I want to do everything I can to establish myself in, because it's not Lewis Hamilton I'm competing against, right? I'm competing against that other guy who's racing in F2 that everyone keeps talking about. Like, that's already put pressure on him. So I think this will be an interesting season. In the end, though, I think I would pick Lewis to beat out George, because I think he's gonna want to end out on a high. I think he'll do everything right. I mean, unless the team asks him to, be second fiddle to George at some point, for which you really have to be in the mix for the championship in any way, which is really hard to see. If those scenarios present itself, then I can see Lewis taking a step back. But I imagine that Lewis will want to end this on a high note, and which means beating out George.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is definitely the spiciest teammate pairing on the grid. I think the crux of this comes down to how competitive that W15 is going to be. We're recording this just as FP2 finished and in Bahrain, and the finishing order in that, as you know, as vague as the findings of that are, is that Lewis finished first, George finished second, Verstappen finished sixth, half a second back. So if we're into that scenario where this is a competitive car that's gunning for a championship, then it's going to be very, very interesting. I think if the car is not competitive, then we'll see Lewis, his motivation to do as well as he can will still be there. But we saw at the end of last season that he tailed off a little bit, because there was, you could tell that he just sort of lost interest, and he was kind of focusing on the next season. And although he'll still want to show Ferrari that he has that fire within him, whether, as if that's really in any doubt. I think if the car is not competitive, it'll be harder for him to keep that motivation. Whereas George really does need to show that he's better than the guy leaving, and that, Kimi Antonelli, if he's coming in 2025, is going to have a massive uphill challenge. In terms of what the car is going to do, look, I understand what you're saying about the car sort of being developed further towards George, but the indications at the moment, like Russell has actually been on record ahead of free practice saying that the Mercedes technical team listened to Lewis, and they moved the center of aero rearwards. They moved the cockpit rearward. They did the stuff that Lewis had asked for. And now the car is a much nicer beast to drive. In fact, his words in testing were, "It feels more like a race car now." So you can't discount the fact that Lewis has a huge amount of experience. He has experience in being up against a teammate that's fast and is hungry and wants to beat him badly. He knows how to deal with that, and he has done for the past 2 seasons. Okay, he got beaten in 2022, but we know there were massive caveats to that, with all of the experimentation that he was doing at the beginning of the season, because that season completely switched on its head towards in the second half. And in 2023, he was the lead Mercedes driver, even though you could tell he wasn't really interested by the end of it. So you kind of have to wonder if that's what's going to happen this season. If he has that drive and the car is up for it, and he's sort of pushed the development direction over the winter, then it could be fireworks. But I think Lewis has the experience, the pace, the hunger, that desire for the eighth to do it. But I can't say that as a guarantee. I think that Lewis can do it, and I think he will.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think that the beauty of this conversation is the amount of variables are just so many, right? I mean, one of the things to consider is where is Toto Wolff's head at with all of this, right? If he is bringing Kimi Antonelli in 25 or maybe even 26, right? And they are looking at regulation changes. I mean, we're starting the 2024 season, but realistically, how are Mercedes in a position to compete for a championship? And then at what point do you sort of give up on the idea of trying to compete in this set of at this stage in these regulations, right? And then just start maybe start working your way towards 26, because Red Bull are so far ahead, or maybe Ferrari and McLaren have made those jumps so far ahead that it's hard to envision a probable scenario in which that could be achieved. And I think that's a very interesting thing with an outgoing driver, not the least of which is a seven-time champion, almost eight-time champion, as you said. I think it's interesting, but it's hard to imagine Lewis sort of giving up on it, because it's not been in his nature to sort of mail it in either.
Yeah. What I will say though is that George has got some very specific things that he needs to do. I think his one lap pace has been outstanding over the past two seasons. He's arguably been the quicker driver over one lap. And if you take the pace advantage, he has been slightly quicker than Lewis, right? If you take the qualifying head-to-head out of it, his actual average qualifying pace has been slightly quicker than Lewis's. But that's in a car that's recalcitrant, that neither driver has said has been absolutely perfect and easy to drive. And I think if the car is a more optimized package, I think Lewis will get more out of it, because that's what he's shown that he's good at in the past. So I think that qualifying pace will be something that he needs to maintain, and it's going to be harder for him to do that in a car that is absolutely nailed. It's the one thing I haven't seen from George yet. I've seen him pull out really good qualifying performances in under par cars, below par cars. But whether he can do it in a championship winning car, I don't know. But he needs to cut the mistakes out in the races. Canada, Singapore, Vegas.
Yeah.
All of those were, if you do those enough, you're not going to win a championship, especially against somebody who's as consistent in the other car as Lewis. And I know he had issues this season as well, but overall, he brought the car home in higher positions more often than not. And he has to nail that advantage that he's going to have towards the back end of the season, where Lewis is going to start getting excluded from technical meetings, development meetings, all of those things. He needs to really make sure that he's the guy that they're listening to. And if there's a deviation in development direction, that he's the one driving it. The team will want to listen to him because he's their future ultimately. But he needs to really, really be on it. And all the indications are really that George will do that, because he's a very pushy character. You've heard him in the cockpit, and you've heard him in debrief. So I'm sure that that's what he will do. So conclusion there, that we think by a slim margin, Lewis is probably going to win this one. And George just needs to make sure he cuts some mistakes out and really, really doubles down on being Merck's the guy.
Agreed.
Right, Ferrari. So last season, Charles finished fifth, Sainz finished seventh in the championship, and the qualifying head-to-head was Charles 15, Carlos 7. So certainly skewed one way in terms of qualifying pace.
But he did have the race win, though, right?
Correct. He did not have the race win, but that wasn't enough for Carlos to beat Charles in the championship. So what do we think is going to happen this season? How do we think it's going to play out?
So much like with the Mercedes drivers, right? I'm a little bit torn on this. I feel like there's an element of what I think should happen versus what I think might happen.
No.
And I really think that Carlos is a very determined guy. He has said all the right things in public, but I have to imagine being told no, you cannot come back for really no particularly good reason other than a seven-time champion coming in is probably not going to sit well with him.
It's a pretty good reason though.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good reason. So I imagine he's not going to want to cede any level of space or sort of deferment to Lewis in that regard. So I imagine we'll see a very feisty Carlos. But other than that, I don't know how to predict this one.
Okay. I'm going to give it a go anyway, because I think that we talked about the fact that Ferrari were quite conservative in the way that they developed their car over the winter, in that they've kept the same pull rod rear suspension, because it seemed to be that towards the end of the last season they'd got on top of their tire worries. And we'll see how that plays out. They certainly seem to have decent long run pace in FP2. It wasn't class leading, but it was okay. And I've said many times now that since Japan, Leclerc was probably the standout driver of the back end of last season. So if you put those two things together, you kind of have to put your money on Charles coming out on top. And then if you put on top of that the fact that he's the guy that's going to be hanging around at Ferrari in the longer term, and Carlos unfortunately is going to have, he's going to be the rejection monkey and not be allowed to turn up to all of the meetings towards the back end of the season. You kind of feel like Carlos has a disadvantage, and that's going to be compounded over the course of the season. But I do take your point. Carlos is a fighter, right? He does not give up, and he is going to want to show any prospective buyers out there that he has what it takes up against the quickest guy in Formula One right now. We already know that he's beaten him over the course of one season, his opening season with Ferrari, in fact, in 2021. So we know that he's got the minerals. It's just, can he do that this season? That's the big question, right? In this teammate pairing, are we going to see the Carlos that finishes a season throughout the season, or are we going to see the Carlos that starts the season on the back foot and then has to work his way back into it? I'm sure he will. I'm sure if that's what happens, he will claw himself back in again. But is that going to be enough to win him the teammate head to head here? What do you think?
The body language coming from both Ferrari drivers this year is starkly different than last year, right? Where we learned at some point in the season that they had sort of known right after the Bahrain test that this was not going to be the year. Whereas this year they seem cautiously optimistic. They're sort of non-committal, but the body language suggests that the car is there, right? And as you said, they've stuck with the concept that has largely not been adapted by the rest of the field. So if Ferrari do have the ability to keep their one lap pace, maybe slightly pegged down, but still be competitive in long runs versus Red Bull, at least going into the season, it seems like they have the best chance of pulling out more race wins. Dare I even say compete for the drivers' championship, but certainly for the constructors' championship, I think that would be there, and that would be an interesting thing to sort of witness, right? Because if Ferrari do get into this mindset of, okay, Max is out there. We're not going to catch him. We'll go to next year and beyond. But hey, we can grab the constructors because for some reason Checo is not able to keep up with it. We've seen him struggle in the past. I think that becomes an interesting dynamic where, yes, they will compete. Charles and Carlos will, but they will both be fighting towards a singular goal. And I think that will change the dynamic. But yeah, you have to give it to Charles. I mean, he's going to want to prove himself as the de facto king there too. So
Yeah,
I get
that's it. You're such a team player Ammar, I can see them
This
both
is a hard
pulling in the
one.
same,
It's a
pulling in
hard
the
one.
same direction to get the constructors. I'm sure they'll be thinking of the team only. But I think I agree. I think there's too much in Charles's favor. He's the quicker driver. He's the incumbent. He's going to be there next season. They've already started to develop the car towards him anyway from the back end of the season last year. I can't see it going any other way. But you know, Carlos is a fighter. Maybe I'll be proved
He's a
wrong.
fighter,
But
but he's also not a spoiler, right? Like he's not going to be someone that, and you can genuinely see even with, I mean, he was hurt, right? Like, I mean, I know it's a really difficult thing to do. It's to be told that you're not coming back next year, and you love this team, and you can genuinely see that, right? So I
yeah.
find it hard to imagine that if Carlos were told to be a team player, that he wouldn't do just that.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's about him being a team player though. I think he's the kind of guy that if you've chucked him out, it's gonna light a fire under him and he's
Gonna
gonna
let
go
it,
for it.
yeah.
I just don't think it's gonna be enough,
Yeah.
just given everything that's stacked against him. That
That
and
second
that's
place is, yeah, but second place is up for grabs. I mean, it was almost last year too, right? So, it's there, it's there,
let's
and
see.
depending on this new concept that the RB20 is displaying, if Checo can't get on top of it, that opens the door wide open, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it'll be Charles that walks through that door. Okay, next up we've got McLaren. Last year, Lando finished sixth in the championship, and Oscar Piastri in his rookie season, the pride of Melbourne, come on, finished up ninth. And the qualifying head-to-head was 15-7 in Lando's favor. Are we going to see a repeat this season, or do you think the tables will be turned?
I'm gonna take a slightly unconventional position here and see what you think about it. I think that this will be Oscar's year. I think
Ooh.
that he has shown glimpses, flashes of being excellent. I mean, I think back to the Qatar sprint, and he's been in there, even at Silverstone, right? When they were actually competing with Max. I think that was an interesting race as well. I feel like this is going to be his year. I feel like this is the year where he's really gonna show everything that he has been. We kind of forget all the controversy that was a couple years ago, right? With him and Alpine and everything. And I think that there's a reason McLaren really wanted him. And while Lando has, signed the extension, he's gonna be there. There are some question marks around Oscar and whether a move might be on the cards in the future. But I think all of that plays into him really just being better than Lando this year. And I know that's not the conventional take, but there you go. I have Oscar beating Lando.
That's interesting. I am, hold on. I so I think that I probably agree with you on certain aspects of that. Certain aspects of that. Lando's a really, really interesting case study because I think his problem is that he hasn't won a race. He's been close to it on a couple of occasions now. And I think he's the driver that if he wins a race, it will open the floodgates for him. But for a variety of reasons, either it's been the car's not been there or circumstances have gone against him. I think of
Right.
the Russian Grand Prix in 2021,
Yep.
Silverstone last year. There's a few areas where you think, okay, if he had been in a different place at a different time, things would have worked out for him. But that's got to bear down on you at some point. You kind of have to wonder if the weight of expectation, both from externally and internally, will make it more difficult for him to get that first win and then open the floodgates. But he's certainly got the ability, hasn't he? He's certainly got the pace. He's been able to drive a difficult, recalcitrant McLaren for the last few seasons and get results out of it. And last year, when the car started to come good, he came really good. The problem for him, though, is that Oscar did too. So Oscar started the season not great when the car wasn't great, but as the car got better, Oscar got better too, to the point where he won. He was the one that won got their sprint race,
Mhm.
right? And it was Lando that was called off in the feature race in the end, wasn't he? In the Grand Prix on the Sunday, it was Lando that was told to hold position. Um, Oscar's big problem last year is a I think a perennial rookie issue,
Mhm.
which is that they don't have the experience yet to do the long runs, to manage the tires, to really understand what the Pirellis need. And it's something that rookies in this era of Formula One are going to struggle with. We've had these tires now for 13 years, and they're difficult. And that's why we prize the guys that can really work them well, the Verstappens and the Hamiltons of this world. And Norris has been really good at it too. I just think Piastri wasn't last season. But then you look at the long run pace in FP2 again. I know this doesn't really mean anything, but the top three were Verstappen, Perez, and then Piastri.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
That's
And
pretty impressive because he will have worked on that over the course of the winter. And if he's done that and up that part of his game, then sure, he's still only in his sophomore year. Is that the right term? I'm not
yeah,
American.
that's I mean, you've blown me away with that term. But
Amazing,
sure.
amazing, amazing. Thanks. I'll take that. Um, he still has a big experience gap to Norris, but he's shown in the junior categories that he's quick to learn, keeps a level head, and isn't prone to big mistakes,
Mm.
which Lando certainly was last season. When Oscar started to challenge him, there were more mistakes. So it'll be interesting to see which way that goes. Do I think that Oscar therefore has enough to beat Lando over the course of a season? I don't know. I'm gonna say Ammar. I'm gonna say tentatively yes, because I'm with you. I I like Lando, um, but I feel sometimes there's a temperament issue that Oscar will have the edge on him over, and I think that will show this season when the experience gap has been narrowed a little bit.
I think so. And again, if you think about Lando's career, he has not been pushed quite this way before, right? As he did last year with, again, with the way Oscar came into the team, the context matters, right? And this game is as much about on track as it is psychology as well, right? So that definitely has to be a part of it. And I agree with you. I think the gap, and for me, I don't know if this is a perception thing only, but the gap between the two drivers at McLaren doesn't feel that big to me. And I think
Mm.
you're probably right. That lack of a race win, that signature win that, hasn't come, partly due to luck in some cases and partly due to, his error, team's error. Like there's been a mix of everything, right? It probably sticks out a little bit. And I really think that this year is more crucial for Lando than anyone else on the grid, I would say, even with the driver openings, because he has made this commitment to McLaren. And he was the first one really to make that commitment, right? He was the first sort of quote unquote domino, if you will, of the silly season. But he has made the commitment so far out in advance that he really needs to make it work with the team. Otherwise, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But I'm with you. I mean, that driver pairing is amazing. It
Yeah.
really is.
Okay, so there we go. We think it's going to be tight, but Oscar Piastri pips it. Come back at the end of the season if we got that one right. We'll definitely have to revisit that.
Bonus points for getting it correct.
Let's go.